My name is Marianne Caldwell, and I learned very early that some people are born into rooms where their voices echo, while others learn how to speak softly enough not to interrupt the applause meant for someone else. In my family, I was the second kind. If you lined us all up at a gathering, you wouldn't have noticed me at first. Not because I was hiding, but because no one was looking. Conversation skimmed past me the way wind moves through open windows, present, but not stopping. My older sister, Vanessa, had always been the reason people gathered in the first place. She was the story everyone wanted updates on. Her life came with milestones that arrived right on schedule, like a calendar perfectly obeyed. Vanessa was radiant in the way people describe when they want to excuse everything else. She had been prom queen, then student council president, then married her college boyfriend 2 months after graduation. He was charming, successful, and came from the kind of family that sent handwritten thank you cards. Their wedding photos still hung in my parents' hallway like framed proof that something had been done right. I, on the other hand, existed quietly. I was the daughter who arrived on time, left early, and helped clean up without being asked. The one who fixed the printer before Thanksgiving dinner and refilled drinks when no one noticed glasses were empty. When relatives asked about me, it was usually mid-conversation, like an afterthought. "And Marianne, you're still doing that data thing?" I always smiled. "Yes, still doing that." No one ever asked what it meant. At birthdays, Vanessa received speeches. At holidays, she received toasts. When she spoke, people leaned in. When I spoke, someone else would interrupt, and no one would circle back. It wasn't cruelty. That would have required intention. This was something softer and sharper at the same time. Absence. I told myself I didn't need attention. That wanting to be seen was immature. That some people were meant to shine, and others were meant to support the structure holding the lights in place. After college, I moved into a modest apartment 2 states away and took a job most people didn't understand well enough to be impressed by. Systems analysis. Infrastructure optimization. Quiet work that only mattered when it failed. I liked it that way. Machines made sense. They didn't forget you were there. While Vanessa posted photos of anniversaries and baby showers, I learned how to solve problems no one else wanted to look at. While my family group chat buzzed with updates I wasn't tagged in, I studied certifications late into the night. I failed interviews. I started again. I learned to let rejection sharpen me instead of shrinking me. No one noticed the promotions. I didn't announce them. No one noticed when I relocated for work. I didn't ask anyone to visit. When my parents asked where I was living, they spoke the way people ask about weather, out of habit, not curiosity. "Oh, still somewhere up north," my mother said once, waving her hand like the details were interchangeable. "Yes," I replied. That answer always satisfied them. Vanessa's life, meanwhile, expanded outward. A new house, a new car, a baby on the way. My mother spoke about her like she was reciting achievements she'd personally earned. My father bragged to strangers. Their pride was loud and public and unquestioned. I stayed background noise. Then came the dinner. It was nothing special on the surface. Just a family gathering to celebrate Vanessa's husband being promoted. Everyone was there. Laughter filled the room. Glasses clinked. I sat near the end of the table, nodding, smiling, passing plates. Halfway through the meal, my aunt raised her glass and said, "To Vanessa, you really did it all right." Everyone agreed. Vanessa blushed, practiced and graceful. I watched my reflection in the polished silverware. I looked calm, composed, invisible. And in that moment, I realized something that surprised even me. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of being quiet because it was easier. Tired of being overlooked because it was expected. Tired of shrinking myself into the negative space of other people's lives. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't need to. But something shifted inside me, subtle and irreversible. Like a switch being flipped somewhere behind the walls. For the first time, I stopped asking myself why they didn't see me. I started asking what would happen if I stopped needing them to. I didn't announce my decision to change anything. There was no dramatic vow, no list taped to a mirror. I simply stopped explaining myself to people who had never listened in the first place. Work became my anchor. Not because I wanted success to prove something, but because it asked something of me. It demanded clarity, decisiveness, and trust in my own judgment. In rooms full of executives who didn't know my family history, I wasn't invisible. I was useful in a way that mattered. I moved again for work, this time to the West Coast. A promotion followed, then another. The titles grew longer. The meetings grew quieter when I spoke. I learned how to command a room without raising my voice. I learned that respect didn't always arrive loudly, but when it did arrive, it stayed. At family gatherings, nothing changed. Vanessa's life continued to unfold in front of an audience. Her baby shower was professionally photographed. Her gender reveal involved fireworks and a drone. My mother cried as if the child were her second chance at something unfinished. I attended when I could. When I couldn't, no one asked why. I sent gifts. Thoughtful ones. Practical ones. They were received with polite gratitude, then forgotten. I didn't mind. Gifts had always been easier than presents. When my parents visited me once, briefly, inconveniently, it felt like hosting acquaintances. They commented on the neighborhood, the traffic, the weather. They asked nothing about my job beyond whether it was stable. Yes, I said. Very. That seemed to settle it. Vanessa, on the other hand, called often. Not to ask about me, but to narrate her own life. Sleepless nights. A difficult pregnancy. The cost of renovations. Her husband's long hours. I listened the way I always had. Patient. Available. Silent in the right places. One evening, after a particularly long call, she laughed and said, "You're lucky, you know. You don't have real responsibilities like this." I stared at the city lights outside my window. I didn't correct her. She wouldn't have understood the language anyway. The truth was, by then, I was managing teams across 3 time zones. I was responsible for systems that kept hospitals, banks, and entire networks running. If I made a mistake, thousands of people would feel it. But that kind of responsibility didn't translate well at dinner tables. So I stayed background noise. The first time I realized how wide the gap had become was at a holiday dinner 2 years later. Vanessa arrived late, flustered, already tired. Everyone paused when she entered. My mother rushed to take her coat. My father pulled out a chair. I had been there for an hour. During dessert, conversation turned to money, interest rates, housing costs. "Everything's so expensive now," my mother sighed, glancing pointedly at Vanessa. Vanessa nodded dramatically. "We're just barely keeping up." All eyes turned to me. It was subtle. A shift. A collective pause. "You're still working in tech, right?" my uncle asked. "Yes," I said. "That must pay well." I smiled. "It pays." No one asked more. But something had changed. For the first time, they were curious, not about me, but about what I represented. After that, the calls began. Small at first. Casual. Vanessa mentioning daycare costs. My mother talking about a roof repair. My father wondering aloud about retirement plans. Each conversation floated just shy of a request, waiting for me to bridge the gap. I didn't. Not yet. When my parents asked if I'd come home more often, I said work was demanding. When Vanessa suggested a weekend trip together, I said my schedule was full. None of it was a lie. The truth was, I had started noticing patterns. How affection appeared alongside need. How interest sharpened around utility. How silence returned when I had nothing to offer. I told myself I was imagining it. That families were complicated. That love didn't always look the way you wanted it to. Then my mother forgot my birthday again. She remembered 3 days later, called laughing, blamed the calendar. I said it was fine. And it was. Because by then, I had stopped measuring love by attention. I was building something else. A life that didn't require applause. A life where being unseen didn't mean being unimportant. I didn't know yet that all of this quiet distance was setting the stage for something louder. That the more invisible I remained, the more valuable I became in ways I hadn't consented to. All I knew was this. I had spent my whole life being background noise. And soon, they were going to turn up the volume, for reasons that had nothing to do with me. The moment they finally noticed me didn't arrive with drama. It slipped in through a crack, unnoticed at first, like light under a closed door. It was my father's 60th birthday. A milestone he insisted on celebrating with a rented hall and too much catering. I almost didn't go. Work had been heavy, and part of me already knew what the evening would look like. Vanessa at the center. Stories retold. Laughter looping back to the same safe places. But guilt has a way of sounding like responsibility, so I booked the flight. I arrived late, slipped into the back of the room, and took a seat near the wall. The way I always did. Vanessa was glowing. She always was in public. She held court effortlessly, baby on her hip, husband at her side. My mother hovered nearby, basking in reflected pride. My father accepted handshakes and compliments, his smile stretched wide. No one noticed me until the toast. A family friend, someone I barely remembered, stood up with a glass in his hand. He spoke about loyalty, about legacy, about raising children who succeed. He mentioned Vanessa by name. Of course he did. Then he paused. And Marianne, he added, squinting at me like he was pulling my face out of memory. I hear you're doing something impressive in tech these days. The room shifted. I felt it before I saw it. Heads turning. Conversation stalling mid-sentence. I work in infrastructure strategy, I said calmly. He laughed. That's one way to put it. My colleague mentioned you helped redesign their systems after that breach last year. Save them millions. The silence landed hard. Vanessa turned toward me, eyes sharp with surprise. My mother's smile froze, then rearranged itself into something careful. My father blinked, like someone recalculating. Oh, my mother said. I didn't know it was that big. I shrugged. It's work. But the damage was done. Or maybe the door had finally opened. After that, people spoke to me differently. They asked questions and waited for answers. They introduced me with qualifiers. She's very successful. She works with major firms. She's really smart. Vanessa stayed close the rest of the night. Too close. Her arm brushed mine. Her questions came quickly, lightly disguised as curiosity. Why didn't you ever say anything? You could have helped us sooner, you know. We're family. I smiled, the same soft one I'd worn my whole life. I didn't think it mattered. That night, my phone buzzed more than it ever had. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Friend requests. Invitations. My mother texted twice asking if I got home safely. Visibility had arrived. And with it, expectation. The calls changed tone almost immediately. Where there had once been distance, there was now urgency. Vanessa wanted advice. My father wanted introductions. My mother wanted reassurance. You're doing so well, she said one evening, voice warm. We're so proud of you. I let the words sit. Pride sounded different when it arrived late. I began noticing how often my name was followed by a need. How often praise softened a request. How silence returned once the question had been answered. I still helped. At first. Not because I felt obligated, but because some part of me still hoped this attention meant something else. That maybe I had crossed into a new version of the family, one where I was finally seen. For a while it almost worked. I was invited to dinners again. Included in group chats. My opinions were asked for, even if they weren't always followed. Vanessa spoke about me with a strange mix of pride and possession. She's the smart one, she told people. We're lucky to have her. Lucky. The word stuck with me. Because luck had never carried me through long nights or failed interviews. Luck hadn't sat beside me while I rebuilt myself piece by piece. And still I said nothing. Until the requests became clearer. A loan. Temporary, of course. An introduction. Just a conversation. Help reviewing something. Help smoothing something over. Each ask came wrapped in familiarity, in family language, in warmth that felt earned only by what I could provide. I began to understand that being seen didn't mean being understood. It meant being evaluated. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was being measured. The first time I felt truly unsettled wasn't when Vanessa asked for advice about daycare, or when my mother asked about kitchen renovations. It was subtle at first, like water pulling at a stone, slow and insistent. It started with my father. He called one evening, voice light but rehearsed. Marianne, could you help with a little financial planning? Of course, I said, and we spoke about budgeting and investments. Nothing alarming yet. Then Vanessa called the next day. Her tone was breezy, casual. Hey, could you look at a business proposal for me? Just a quick glance. You know your expertise. And suddenly everything clicked. They weren't just asking, they were relying on me. Not because they needed guidance, but because they knew I would comply. Because I had always been the quiet solution, the invisible hand. I paused and let it sit. I listened as Vanessa explained every problem her life now had. The baby barely slept. The mortgage payments were heavy. Her husband's startup stalled. Each sentence landed like another subtle calculation. Every "I wish, and it's so hard" had an unspoken addendum. "You can fix this for me." I didn't respond with shock. I didn't yell. I just listened. That had always been my role, and they expected it. Over the next few weeks, the requests multiplied. My mother asked for help navigating contractor bids. My father wanted advice on investments he wasn't sure about. Vanessa sent me spreadsheets, loan applications, and even a long email asking me to leverage professional contacts. It was all so ordinary. Just family helping family. Just me providing the solution because no one else could. But that evening, my grandmother called. She rarely called unless she had something serious to say. Her voice was measured, soft. "Marianne, I need to tell you something. Something you're going to find disappointing." I braced myself, expecting perhaps a health scare, a small familial drama. Instead, she said it plainly. "They don't see you as family the way you think. You're useful. That's it. Keep them close until the projects are done." I sat silently, absorbing the words. The warmth I'd mistaken for connection had always been conditional. Praise and attention weren't love, they were currency. My heart throbbed, not with anger, but with recognition. And for the first time, I made a quiet decision. I continued to respond, to help, to smile. But I stopped sending money. I stopped filling every gap. I kept answering calls, listening, offering advice, but I withheld the one thing no one had anticipated: my unquestioned compliance. The effect was slow. Vanessa would launch into stories about her struggles mid-conversation, waiting for me to solve them. My mother grew increasingly visual, sending photos of kitchen plans, bathroom tiles, cabinet samples, pausing as if I would complete the picture for them. My father's "help me understand" calls stretched into subtle lessons in comparison: friends who retired early, vacations without financial worry, luxury cars. They were used to me bridging gaps. They were used to me filling the spaces their care left empty. And now, without my silent compliance, they were forced to feel the absence of my energy. The first time it hit me fully was Christmas. They wanted me home early, claiming Vanessa's child needed more time with their aunt, my mother insisting it wouldn't feel right without me there. I booked the flight, knowing the pattern, expecting the same familiar performance of family warmth. When I arrived, the house looked like a magazine spread. Cinnamon, pine, soft music hum. My mother hugged me longer than usual. Vanessa stayed close, constantly touching my arm, scanning me as if I might vanish. My father poured my drink, commented on the view, and then fell silent. That's when I spoke. Not loud, not angry, not dramatic. I reminded them of the barbecue months ago, the one after everyone left, the one my grandmother had later referenced. I described the words exchanged in the backyard, the laughter, the casual cruelty disguised as jokes. I let it land in their laps like a stone in still water. I told them, calmly, that I understood the dynamics of our relationship, that I wasn't angry anymore, just finished. Vanessa tried to interrupt. I didn't stop her. I stood up. I put on my coat. I said I was leaving. No apologies. No explanations. No attempts to fix what isn't broken on your end. I've already made my decision. I walked out. The cold hit my face, sharp and liberating. My grandmother, waiting silently, got in the car with me. No questions. No judgment. Just a nod, an affirmation of something I hadn't realized I had been craving, acknowledgement without expectation. That night, for the first time in my adult life, silence wasn't empty. It was clean. It was freedom. The quiet freedom didn't last long before reality reminded me of how deeply my family's expectations had been entangled with my identity. It began with a call from a recruiter I had never spoken to before. He was anxious, stumbling over words, saying my name with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Marianne Caldwell," he asked. "You're listed as a partner in a new cybersecurity consulting firm. We were told you were available for board meetings." I froze. I had never heard of this firm. Never agreed to anything like it. I asked for the website. Within minutes, I saw it. My photo, my resume, a fabricated career history, glowing endorsements I had never received. It was just believable enough to fool investors. Just enough to place me in a position I had never occupied. I called my father first. He answered, cheerful and casual. "Oh, Marianne, this? We thought you'd be proud. It's for the family. Your name carries weight, you know." I didn't let him finish. "You've weaponized my reputation," I said quietly. "Do not explain. Fix it." I hung up. Within the hour, Vanessa called. Her voice was incredulous. "I didn't know. I swear I wasn't involved." But I understood immediately. They hadn't just needed money or guidance. They wanted my credibility, my identity, the professional respect I had earned quietly over years. They were consuming me without acknowledgement. That night I made calls. Lawyers. Cease and desist. Digital profiles scrubbed. By morning, the fake firm was offline, investors confused, and my career intact. I called my grandmother. She wasn't surprised. "They don't love people," she said softly. "They love what people can give them." Her words hit me harder than anger. I realized I had been operating on a dangerous assumption that family attention meant connection, that their praise meant love. It hadn't. It was utility dressed in warmth. From that point, I changed everything. New phone, locked down accounts, digital walls, thicker than any apartment walls I had ever built. I even left the city for a month, alone, letting space reset the patterns. The first time I saw them afterward, I was ready. Not for confrontation, not for reconciliation, just for observation. Vanessa sent a message months later, trembling with a mix of guilt and exasperation. "We didn't mean to hurt you. It was chaotic. I hope you can forgive us." I didn't respond. The requests stopped. Calls became sporadic, cautious. Invitations stopped arriving. Silence arrived, but this time it wasn't empty. I sold my penthouse. Not because I had to, but because it belonged to a version of myself I no longer recognized. I bought a brownstone in Brooklyn that needed work. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, every brick I restored felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been co-opted for others' needs. I adopted a dog, battered and stubborn, with one floppy ear, naming him Shadow, because he mirrored the presence I had been for my family, always there, quiet, overlooked, loyal. But unlike me, Shadow didn't pretend to be unseen. He simply existed as he wanted. I rebuilt my life on my terms. Therapy, weekends off, friends and colleagues who saw me as me, projects I chose, mentorship for young women in tech, coffee meetings, resume reviews, salary negotiations, teaching them how to recognize when silence is obedience and when it should be power. Over time, I learned something profound. Freedom doesn't come from vengeance. It doesn't come from punishment. It comes from clarity, from boundaries, from understanding exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone exploit your gifts, your love, or your labor. My grandmother visited months later. Walking through my brownstone, she touched door frames, windowsills, the worn wood of the staircase. "This feels like you," she said simply. "Not perfect, not curated, not performative. Me." I asked her if she regretted my severing ties with my family. "You gave them more chances than they deserved," she said. "That's not failure, that's grace." For the first time, I understood. Grace doesn't mean giving endlessly. Grace doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for the comfort of others. Grace is knowing when to walk away with your dignity intact. The first few weeks of silence were strange. No calls, no texts, no dramatic apologies, just absence. And yet, it felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. I realized I could finally hear myself think without the background noise of expectation, guilt, or manipulation. I spent mornings in my brownstone, sunlight spilling across the old wooden floors. Shadow followed me everywhere, and I learned to cook meals that took longer than 15 minutes. I rearranged my furniture, hung artwork that I loved, framed photographs that reminded me of the person I had always been before my identity was filtered through someone else's praise or approval. I discovered joy in small routines that were mine, completely mine. Work became a sanctuary. I continued leading teams, taking projects I chose, mentoring young women in technology. I watched them grow, guiding them in ways I wish someone had guided me, not to make them invisible, but to help them see their own worth. Coffee meetings, resume workshops, salary negotiations, interviews, confidence building. Every time I saw a young woman's eyes light up because she finally understood her power, it reminded me that my silence had been my own preparation for influence that didn't require validation from those who couldn't see me. Months later, my grandmother visited. She wandered through the brownstone slowly, touching the door frames, the windowsills, the worn wood of the staircase. When she reached the porch, she smiled, satisfied. "This feels like you," she said simply, her voice gentle. "No one can take this from you." I asked her if she regretted my cutting contact with my family. "You gave them more chances than they deserved," she said. "That's not failure. That's grace." It took me a long time to understand what she meant. Grace isn't about giving endlessly. It isn't about sacrificing your energy, your love, your labor, for those who cannot see your value. Grace is understanding that leaving behind what does not serve you is also a gift to yourself. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to perform for anyone. I wasn't background noise anymore, and I didn't need applause to validate my existence. I was finally the narrator of my own story. Not long after, my cousin Megan called. She left a voicemail. Nothing dramatic, no begging, no guilt. Just an update on life, a soft acknowledgement that things had shifted. Vanessa had returned to school. My mother volunteered for local projects. My father resumed work without leaning on my expertise. The fake business that had tried to borrow my credibility collapsed quietly. My leaving had forced a reckoning. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. I was already living a life defined by my terms. I sold the penthouse in New York, not because I had to, but because it belonged to a version of me that had existed for the sake of perception, not reality. I had rebuilt something authentic. A brownstone, a dog, a career, a life carefully curated to match the rhythm of my choices. In my quiet moments, I still keep the photo my family had once sent me, a snapshot from when I was 12, fixing an old radio while everyone else laughed in the background. I keep it not to dwell on the past, but as a reminder that I had always been competent, capable, and resilient. I had never been broken, only unseen. Freedom, I learned, isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of obligation to perform for people who will never see you for who you truly are. Freedom is choosing where your energy goes and understanding that being visible doesn't always require anyone else's permission. Over time, I noticed the most profound change, peace. A life without constant negotiation for validation, a life where my generosity and attention were no longer exploited, was richer than any applause my sister had ever received. I could travel without guilt, take weekends without worry, mentor without expectation, and love without compromise. And when I returned to my work, my young mentor would ask me for guidance. I would tell them gently, being invisible doesn't mean you lack value. It means you have the chance to build it yourself, quietly on your own terms. I smiled at them because, finally, I could smile at myself. I was seen, not by the people who had learned to take, but by the world I had chosen to step into. Not as background noise, not as a supporting character in someone else's story, but as the author of my own life. And that was enough.